This is the video on the Budapest Gambit. Of all of the mainline openings against 1d4, the Budapest has got to be one of the nastiest and vilest openings that black can throw at white. And it's something that isn't seen very often in tournament play, so it has a lot of surprise value, and it'll be great in big open tournaments like K-12 Nationals. So black begins with knight f6, and it only can occur when d4 and c4 is played, and you throw out the move e5. Now, this is a pawn sacrifice in the center in order to speed up time and get swift attacks on the white king. Typically, if white just plays solidly, you get back your pawn and you just have a position to play from. But there are a lot of tricks and traps here. So I'm going to show you all the different lines that can be thrown at you when playing the Budapest. So first and foremost, if they play 3 knight c3, a lot of these lines are going to look a lot alike. We take on d4 and then kick the queen around. Put our bishop typically on b4 or c5 for good effect. And we develop all the other pieces to natural normal squares. And in this position, a5 is played so the bishop doesn't get kicked. And after knight f3, see how we get all of our pieces out, developed, and we have a reasonable game. So that was 3 knight c3. Now let's look at if white plays on move 3 bishop g5. Same plan, take on d4. The only caveat is we don't want to play knight c6 immediately because he'll play bishop takes f6 and our pawn structure will be ruined. So we simply play the move bishop e7 and on the next move kick the queen. And since bishop f5 isn't a possibility, we kick the bishop and then play bishop e6, and there we have another solid game. So next, we'll look at move 3 knight f3. Again, we take, hit the knight, and after castling, the main thing is we don't want to develop our knight here because his knight can take and it'll double the pawns. So we play b6 to play bishop b7 to play knight c6. So we're able to take back with the bishop instead of the pawn. After bishop d2, white wants to be able to play b4 to kick our bishop off the good square, so we stop him. This a5 theme you'll see a lot in most of the positions to prevent b4. After a3, b4 still isn't a threat, because after a pawn takes, our rook will take their rook. So no worries there. So bishop b7, and after knight c3, knight c6, and black has completed development and has a solid position. If white takes, we've got the two bishops lined up pointing towards white's king, and I would be looking at trying to create some tactics, possibly getting this knight out of the way and the queen up and over. Next, we have e3, which is one of the first major variations. The other three are just garbage moves that you probably won't ever see in tournament play. e3 is actually a legitimate response because they go, okay, he's attacking my pawn, this looks weird, something feels sketchy, I'm just going to defend it. Take. In all these lines, if they leave the pawn sitting there, you take. Easy memory marker. Check. And we're getting simple development castling. And after d5, what's great about this position is we're going to be able to play against these hanging pawns no matter what white does. Typically, we're going to take and leave him with an isolated pawn. If he pushes by, you just play b6 and chip away at the pawn structure, making it weaker. So in this case, he plays knight e2, and we stick him with this iso. Now, bishop g4, and after castles takes, we took away the only defender of d4. Now after knight c6, we've completed development, we're hitting this pawn, and after bishop f3, a sample line would come here, and after c5, black definitely has a better position than white. He's got a rook on an open file, he's got a knight that's well posted that can reach into white's position, and we have a lot of flexibility with plans to attack these weak pawns, and at some point we could think about even snagging that bishop. So at worst, this is an equal position. Now a line that will be played very frequently against you that is bad is someone's first reaction at seeing this is, I'm just going to push by. And this is immediately bad because, like, think about it. White has made 3 moves, and they've all been pawn moves. But black has a pawn in front of his king out, a knight, and a bishop already, and we're ready to castle. So he's way ahead in development. After knight c3, d6, and after e4, we start chopping away at his center immediately. And here's an important memory marker. In the game, white played bishop d3. But if he plays the move knight f3, he opens himself up for this f2 tactic. Because knight g4, and there's really no good way for white to defend against f2. So when they play d5, always be watching out to be able to play this f2 tactic. So what I will say is if I altered the position a little, say if I put in castling and I put in bishop e2, this is no longer a good move to be played here, even though we're attacking the square because he's going to castle. And the theme here is I have two active, aggressive, attacking pieces. This is a defender. This is a defender. If you make this trade, this is a bad trade, and his king is temporarily unsafe. I mean, I get one check, and after he does this, he's developed, and now I've got to defend. And already, white's just stronger here. I don't see how we can coordinate our pieces enough with all of them sitting at home for an attack. Do not make this trade two minor pieces for a rook and pawn. It is not a good trade in the opening. Okay, so going back after c6, we see bishop d3. We just castle, get ourselves off of this pin, and make a threat of our own. Queen d2 defends that threat. We defend our knight so he doesn't double up our pawns. After knight a4, our queen and bishop are being attacked. So we offer to trade queens. He takes, and there's a very nice tactic here. Knight takes c5. The queen isn't hanging because if queen takes queen, knight takes d3 check. After castles, this game became much better for black very quickly here. White decides to blunder and quickly ends up in a resignable position. So of all the move threes, we have e3 and d5 that you really need to focus on. The others is you look at it once and you're okay. Now, let's head off to the actual main line, the critical test. Accepting the gambit. The only way to refute a gambit is to accept it. So, we put our knight on g4, and it has a twofold purpose. One, we're thinking about grabbing our pawn back, and two, if white allows us, there's going to be some f2 tricks. So, first and foremost, let's go over the sideline, f4. So white goes, okay, I got a pawn. I'm so excited. I'm going to hold on to it. No, just bishop c5. Now, white's going to have some serious problems with the f2 square. For instance, if he plays e3, I just take. And when he defends his queen, we've gotten our pawn back. And I mean, I'm going to castle. I'm going to play knight c6. I'm going to play d6. I'm going to get this bishop out. And I've completed development. And white's king is unsafe. You can even think about after castling playing f6. So that way the rook will be lined up with the king once you take. So that was f4. So coming back to this position, let's consider e4. It attacks our knight, so we just grab the pawn. And I'm not too worried in these positions because the plan is develop all your pieces at this point. Check, there's one. Okay, defending. Saying my bishop's going to get kicked around, so do you want to trade bishops? Kicks his bishop around, secures the knight. There's that pesky move again to make sure our bishop doesn't get kicked around. And then finally, black figures out a way to get all of his pieces developed and develops an extremely aggressive position with castle's queenside. Anytime in chess you castle on opposite wings, white wants to throw his pawns to try to rip open black's kingside structure, where black wants to throw his pawns to rip open white's kingside structure. Whoever's faster with the attack wins. White, understanding this principle, begins to get out of the way for the pawns, and black begins his lever to attack with his pawns. Takes. Black slows down white's attack, not allowing to open files. And then after g5, you clearly see how both sides are advancing their plans. Next, we have e3. Again, another plan where the knight's being attacked, and when our knight's attacked, take the pawn. Check. Takes. And we're just going to simply develop our pieces, put them on good squares, and we're good to go. Next up, we have knight f3. And this is the second most popular move. We will cover the last move, which is the main line, and we are good to go with the entire opening series. So after knight f3, bishop c5. Very important move because we're threatening some seriously nasty tactics here. So he defends. Now at play knight c6, both knights are working together to recapture the pawn. And after bishop e2, castles. Castles, he takes. We defend. And you can quickly see how black gets a very playable and aggressive position. He just puts all of his pieces out on aggressive squares. And this is the type of stuff that you play for in the Budapest. Black to play and win. Take your time. It's not a checkmate. Pause your video. Okay, hopefully you paused your video, and hopefully you found the excellent move, knight takes e3, with the idea that he can't really recapture because we're going to be able to take back with the rook with devastating effect because we have this really strong discovered check when the rook moves. So even if the king moves, the queen hangs. So after knight takes e3 in the game, white played rook e1, which looks at first sight very strong because if this knight moves, he'll play queen takes rook, and after rook takes e8, checkmate. So black defends his rook. Simple. Takes. And now the threat of the discovered check is so strong, white sacrifices his queen. Black utilizes the pin. And gradually there's some maneuvering. I just wanted to show the rest of the game how he threatens mate, and when you're up material, you trade down. He forces trades to get to a position where all the pawns are gradually going to fall, and white resigned a few moves later. Now, let us hit the main line of the Budapest Gambit. It's move 4, bishop f4. Now, the first reaction is to play bishop c5, but that is wrong. The difference between playing bishop c5 versus knight f3 and playing bishop c5 versus bishop f4 is huge. Against knight f3, when we play bishop c5, after e3, this bishop is locked inside of the chain. But against bishop f4, if we play bishop c5, the bishop is outside of the chain and able to defend this pawn. Now, this is not a good line for black. So, a very creative move found recently, which makes this opening completely playable in my opinion, is the move g5. It looks sketchy, but the principle is we're aiming to attack and develop quickly this pawn, so we're gaining time to be able to develop our bishop. So now he's got to do something with the bishop. He moves away. We get bishop g7 in. Now we're hitting that pawn twice. Now say if he plays h4, we just grab the pawn back, grab this pawn, and tactics are bound to happen in this type of position. Knight takes b2. We utilize the pin using our bishop and queen, and the idea of this pawn pushing forward. So if he played rook c1, d4. So after e5, d4, we get our piece back, and clearly this is the type of position that black wants to be playing. These pawns are still weak and easy to attack after moves like knight d7, for instance. So, after bishop g7, knight f3 is the main line. Aggressive. Don't think defensive. h6 isn't great. In fact, that traps your knight. After h6, h3, knight can't go anywhere. So, knight c6, giving us the ability to take this guy. And this one's defended, so we're good to go there. So after h4, it's the same plan as before. We take, except we can play g4, and very quickly we'll see the type of game where after you've defended the threats, you have a very reasonable position. You can in fact do another castle queenside variation with an eventual queen d7 and c6. So, the last of the last lines, the main line. After knight c3, we finally take back our pawn h5. Great move, threatening to trap this bishop, forcing him to trade off his great bishop for our centralized but easily kickable knight. We'd love to have the bishop pair in this open position. After h3, d6, bishop e6, and black has prepared a big attack and castles queenside. Now, we have already started our attack, so if white castles kingside, he's really castling into it here. Whereas white has set up a defensive structure over here, and it's not going to be easy for him to crack us open, and his pieces aren't really prepared for this. In my opinion, black already has an almost strategically winning game here. After knight b5, king b8, just, stopping any threats. Knight d4, black's so concerned with his attack that he gives up his bishop pair. Now we're attacking. Do we want to trade? No. So after rook d1, white's looking at potentially doing some c5 stuff. We're not worried. g4. We're keeping our attack going. Takes, takes. Bishop f4, c6. Go away, queen. And we're gradually creating a pass pawn. White decides to try to bail out, but it's just not enough in the position. And the rest of this game gets really tactically nasty. Black starts giving up material like crazy here. After queen a5, he plays rook d8, and this is just nuts to me. Takes, hitting the queen, so he moves away. And after rook f5, now he's threatening. Oh, it's just nasty. After queen g3 check, he defends himself, and after queen h4, d3 check, king takes d3, and rook d8, and that forces white's resignation. Because let me go ahead and ask the engine here. Yeah, the best move that white has in the position is queen d4, and clearly that ends quickly and badly. So after king c2, there's the line rook f2, and the best he can do is sack the queen. Otherwise, it's bishop e2, rook e2, rook d2, rook e takes d2, and after king b1 or king c1, we have the queen coming in for the very, very nice finish. Hopefully, you were able to get a lot out of the Budapest Gambit video. It is a very viable and aggressive option and a very nice surprise weapon against d4 players.